to begin.
You're listening to the Social Primate. I'm your host, Eddie Aguirre. And today my guest, mi tocayo, the powerful Eddie Herrera Jr.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Dude, Eddie, thank you so much for making the time to come out onto the show. I've had the opportunity to listen to a couple of different bits of your journey.
Right.
And it's been a really fascinating dive into these realities that we're not entirely sure of here as a public. And I do want to start first and foremost, thank you for your work, not just in what you've done as a firefighter, but also as a person. Yeah. Through your stories, I think you're a great example of the mutability of the human condition and the ability to keep driving for change, for betterment, and just really being able to hold yourself accountable and make the choices that you need to do to make sure that you become a better person. So thank you.
Appreciate you. I'm humbly grateful just to be here and share and, allow whatever comes, for the listeners, to educate and just be here to help,
Yeah. And with that, I kind of want to get started on just the whole idea of the reality that you faced over the last 18 years. You mentioned you were advancing yourself in your career, but obviously it didn't start easy for you.
No, it did not. It was a journey.
Do you mind telling us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've recently accepted a position as a fire apparatus engineer, but prior to that, obviously my story starts with my journey and ultimately being incarcerated, and then working as an incarcerated firefighter for 2 years in an institutional firehouse and servicing the community where I was incarcerated, and ultimately being free and coming home and going through the journey of now becoming a paid firefighter for the state of California and working on self. And the journey just continues.
Oh, man. And now, as I mentioned, you unfortunately had to spend 18 years going through all this, right? Mm-hmm. Now, at what point for you did you decide that this needed to happen to you? Like you needed to make this change?
So it's a process. Everything that we go through in life, it's a process. Our belief systems, our value systems, where, whether we know it or not, we have them. But assessing them, and for me, it just so happened to be in some of the lowest points in my life, which when I was incarcerated and I was in the hole, that I had that aha moment or paradigm shift, if you will. And it was when I was in the hole. I was in the lowest low of my life, and I had to do a lot of self-reflection, and there is when I realized that I started working on a lot of the trauma that I had that led me to the choices ultimately being incarcerated.
It's something that I honestly can't comprehend, and I was just mentioning to you before air, that for somebody from the public, when we got faced with these moments of devastation because of the wildfires, I think it was an opportunity for the public to focus on the people who were actually on the front lines. Right. And for a lot of us, we had no idea that we had incarcerated individuals risking their lives, for pennies a day, basically, to keep us protected, keep our communities intact. And I think, right, once we started getting into the position where we're able to really evaluate what's going on, we start seeing that, these systems don't always seem just, even for individuals who may have made mistakes in their past. Mm-hmm. But again, I think it's one of those things that when you start researching and looking into it, you start seeing that this takes a lot of strength and courage internally to be able to put yourself in these positions where you want to be of service to somebody.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. For me, it was very challenging because of the capacity I worked in. I was actually a institutional municipal firefighter. So what the public sees right now, they're only seeing a part of it that what we're capable of doing. Fire hand crews is what they're seeing right now, fighting fires, wildland fires. My job as a firefighter is I actually worked in a firehouse and we serviced the community. It was all risk, and we had a strong mutual aid contract with the county that we were at. So I responded to structure fires, medical calls, CPRs, traffic collisions, and then of course your wildland fires. And this was in the area that I was incarcerated at. Obviously I wasn't in the prison grounds, I was outside in a fire station, but we serviced that whole community. And Yeah, it's one of those, unique situations where, you're still servicing the community and you're being a public servant.
That's crazy. Because, I mean, again, a lot of us don't even know that these programs basically cover a bunch of different areas of this. Right. And from my understanding, I think you had an incident where you were on a call, right?
Yeah, that was, I would say for me, is what really shifted me into believing in myself that this is something that I can do when I come home. Mm-hmm. Initially, when I, being incarcerated so long, you have this mindset of like, I would say it's a selfish mindset and survivability mindset because you're so trying to survive in there, right? Mm-hmm. And so then when I was accepted into the fire station and went through the training and all that, it really worked with me in a way where mentally I was like challenged. Like I was like, whoa, we're servicing this community. We're going to the public. We're going to do this. And so it was a positive thing in the sense it allowed me to start being reconnected with society, and that helped me a lot. And while I was running these calls, it just so happened that one of the calls that I ran was a traffic collision. And the traffic collision, the individual, the victim, wasn't a head-on collision, and our engine was assigned what we call landing zone coordination, which means you life flight them out. Mm-hmm. And so we get there to the heli spot. The ambulance pulls up, and as it pulls up, it turns out the victim didn't have a heartbeat, so we were directed to go into the ambulance and start working them and do some CPR. And so we did, and I get there. As soon as I get there, I start giving my compressions and then working to give him oxygen. And as I noticed, I saw that he didn't have the firearm on him, but there's a sidearm. It was empty, mm-hmm. and I just can tell by looking at him, he looked like that. He might have been, either military or service. Yeah. But with the surreal part of it was as I was, providing him oxygen, I can see the back of the ambulance, and I can see a line of police officers and military, and they're standing there. They're not coming to the ambulance, but they're just all standing lined up there, and you can see there was like 25 to 30. And I was just like, whoa, it is a police officer. And we worked him for like 40 minutes, and unfortunately he succumbed to his injuries. But the part that really got me was after we were directed to put his wife came to pick up his body, and we transported him from the gurney to the van. And as we're doing that, we cover him up with an American flag. And then afterwards, we're directed to take off our helmet and salute him. So we're saluting him as he's being taken away. And after that, the police officers and military come to us and start shaking our hands, said, thank you for trying to save our brother. Yeah. And for me, that was like surreal, because at that moment, I was not an incarcerated firefighter. I was a firefighter. And I realized that that's the way they saw me. And so that was it. That was the moment. From after that, I ran into, when I did all my calls, moving forward, I always looked at it as like, when I give service to this community, whoever it is, I look at it as how would I want anybody else to service my family, my loved ones? And the rest is history, bud.
When you really think about like the contrast in that, it's like you being locked up, you come to face with like dark parts of humanity, and like I think we were mentioning earlier, it was like when you consistently put yourself in front of negativity, that's what you're going to continue to see, even if it's not the thing that surrounds you, And I think, when you put it into perspective that you're put in these positions where correctional officers or police officers, they're usually seen to an incarcerated person as like the bad person, right? The bad guy. But in reality, it's like when you flip the narrative around and you see yourself being put in the position where you're, again, being of service, the people's perception of who you are changes when they don't know where you come from, Sure. Yeah. And then that is what normally gives you value to say, hey, whoa, like this is how people see me. Like I can change that within myself too.
Definitely. And I believe that for me, I had already started doing a lot of the work prior to going to the firehouse, a lot of self-reflection, working, doing programs, reading material. And it's unfortunate to say this, but like rehabilitation is truly oneself. They have to do it on themselves. Like, you can't really wait on the system itself to do it. I know that it says CDCR, but the reality is you have to be responsible for your own rehabilitation and your own change. And then once you accept that, then the next thing is you tap into the resources that are at your disposal if they're there, right? And so for me, that journey started before I got there. And it just so happened that once I was there, it just solidified my change in my mental status as far as where I wanted to be, and that was to be of service. And so when I did come home, I just continued that path, and nothing really was going to stop that. That's where I was at now.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, like, what nudged you to jump into that process of, holding yourself accountable and the person who you wanted to be? Like,
so it started. It's a long journey. I when I was in the system, I would say it's a very unique situation. I worked my way down from level 4s all the way down to a firehouse. So that journey is a mental journey from going from like your maximum security level 4 to level 3 to level 2 to level 1, and then ultimately a firehouse. Like, it's an emotional roller coaster. And what I learned was the closer I started getting to having more privileges, the more I was able to start working on myself more. There was more resources. And I would say it was when I was in level 3 and I found myself in the hole that I hit my lowest of my low. I was by myself. I didn't really have any material to read for the first week and a half. I didn't have books because you have to go through a process where they see who you are and if they can give you stuff. So that whole time you don't have anything but other than your thoughts. So you're trying to keep yourself preoccupied, right? And so my thoughts were like, of course, hope, like family, just trying to keep myself sane. But at some point or another, it was in that moment where I contemplated suicide. I thought about, like, this is the end of the road. Like, I'm not going to escape this. I have too much time. There's nothing else. And going through that mental process and realizing, hey, you have stuff going on with you. There's obviously some form of trauma. And I faced my fears, my trauma. I did a lot of, self-reflecting. And all it took was that one thing to have, like, hope. It was that one thing. And what it was my kids. The thought of one day being able to see them when I came home. I didn't know. I had, from being incarcerated so long, my relationship was severed. That bond was lost because they were so young. So, but as a parent, you always had that connection, whether, children are old enough, but you always had that. And for me, just the thought of that one day being able to see them, and then my parents, that's what gave me that hope and made me say, you can do it. And so now it was just one day at a time, and I kept myself preoccupied. I literally, like, and those that can relate to this, the brain is fascinating. We really had the capacity to grow in so many ways, but it's just being able to be open to change. And for me, was being able to accept that and then now start just applying that. So I kept myself preoccupied. I would do writing when I could, and just started putting the pieces of the puzzle together, of causative factors of what landed me where I was at.
You said something very important right now in regards to, like, taking it day by day. Because I think a lot of times when you think about it here, listeners and everything, when we think about it and we're planning for things, we're planning for the future, we plan for weeks, months in advance. And that's a liberty that we have, right? That's a freedom that we have to be able to think that way. But then if you're put in these positions where you have nothing going for you, those thoughts are going to be detrimental to your mental health, Yep. And you have no choice but to take it day by day. Survive one day. I survived today. I'm going to survive tomorrow. And you do it one at a time. And yeah, the length of time is still going to be there, but you're able to have more control over what you can do now rather than focusing on the what ifs, right?
100%. One of the things that I learned a lot about was what not even realizing was meditation. Like, slowing the mind and being able to like slow my thoughts, like what was going on. And I realized that we can control that. And obviously breathing exercises, like I had not read any material on any of that, but just like paying attention to my body and how it was reacting to certain emotions and triggers, right, of trauma. Like I was realizing like I can shift all that thought process. And this is what leads me to think, I truly believe that negative thoughts create negative actions and positive thoughts create positive actions. Yeah. And the more you live your life in that positivity, it's just going to attract it, you know? And so you feed that. And so for me, that's where I shifted my thought process. I started thinking positively, right? And that's where that little hope came in. And the next thing is, like you were saying, is one day at a time, something positive. I started to create like little tasks every day and accomplishing those little tasks. And as I was doing that, it started building my confidence. And yeah, and I started shifting my way of how I treated people. So like, you know, eventually when I did get out of the hole, I started to apply that in the sense of how I started treating people. Like I started to treat them positively, not negatively.
Yeah.
And it just started to become a pattern and a habit. And it was easy after that.
Yeah, you know, and I mentioned to you, you know, through the conversation with Safe Space, shout out, because that was a great conversation. So I do ask people to listen to that as well. But towards the end of that specific conversation, I mentioned to you that you said about to give yourself the choices to make yourself a better person, right?
Yeah.
And again, that to me held so much value to it. And I mentioned that when I started off my day, I told myself, I choose to be kinder today, to be more patient. You know, there's days where I'm in traffic and I'm just like cursing at people like, dude, get out of my way, you know, and like I catch myself like, why am I acting this way? Why it's 7 a.m, why am I so angry?
Yeah.
And it's just those little things that ultimately throughout my day, it starts weighing on me and I start feeling like this nasty way, you know. And when I heard you tell me that through this conversation, you weren't telling me specifically, you know, but to me it felt personal. I was like, you know what? I do have the choice to be accountable for the way I act with things, you know? And very much so, like, especially with somebody who has the freedom to just do whatever they want and just apply themselves in whatever form or shape they want to you know, to the community, you start realizing that, like, it's okay to just take a breath and just be like, you know what? I'm going to make little changes, you know? And I applied that to myself, and it made my day feel lighter, feel better. And I think that's one of those things that, regardless of what position you're in, whether you're incarcerated, whether you're free, those are the things that relate to us in the human level.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%, because I can relate to that now. Like, I as you were sharing what you were sharing, I was thinking about the driving and like how in the back of my head, like I can easily react and say, hey, this person cut me off, this person did that. But then I step back and I tell myself, like, it's not that serious.
Yeah.
Like, because I always remind myself, I go to the root and I say, man, where I was at before, I never got to experience this. And so then that shift, that mental shift, I start to find gratitude and appreciation just to experience that.
Yeah,
right?
I get that.
So that's the shift. Like, it always goes back to that. It's like, you were way worse off, like where you were at before. You've been to the worst places and experience what it really feels like to feel pain and suffering. And so then now this little thing is nothing, it's trivial. And so those little things, I use those, like I practice that all the time. And it's resilience. That's what really being able to bounce back and practicing that. And the more you practice it, the more it becomes easier and easier and easier, you know? And it's just reminding yourself that. And then as you do it, like you said, one day at a time, it's like you don't even have to think about it anymore. And I find myself doing that all the time now.
Like for you, what has been like the biggest things that you see in terms of the public's perception of people in these situations? Like you be able to experience it from the inside and outside now. Like you just mentioned right now, you learned this new value, this new way of kind of reframing things for you.
Right.
Like saying like, oh, I didn't get the chance to experience this. I am now. Again, we take all these moments for granted a lot of the time. Like, why don't we value them as much as we should?
Well, I think going back to something you said is the external perception. I think that people in general, a lot of how we see everything is based on the public and opinion and feedback. And when we're younger, that has a stronger influence on how we see things. So for me, I realized it personally, like everything how I saw the world was always from that perspective, right? Mm-hmm. And perception. And I didn't know that I had control of that. I didn't have that awareness that I can control that. It wasn't until later in life I was able to make the connection of my internal belief, right? So once I understood that, I was able to change that and shift that and realize that no matter what people's perception is, I have control of how I see things, right? Mm-hmm. And I realized that before, the way I used to have this perspective of the world was from a perspective lens of judgment. And through my journey and everything, all the work that I've done, that perspective lens has changed, and it's changed from a perspective lens of judgment to now a perspective lens of compassion, because it comes with that understanding, because I've lived it. I've been there. And so now I can empathize with individuals when they're going through stuff, because we all have emotions, right? We all have these thoughts and feelings. And so because now I've experienced all that and tapped into that, now I'm like, I can make that choice of how I want to see things and view things.
Yeah. Now, question is like, how have you dealt with like the weight of your past and embracing now the pride that you feel in what you're doing?
The best way I can describe it is I've changed a negative into a positive. See, when I was younger and I had shame, I had experienced trauma at a young age, and the shame that was associated with it was a negative emotion that always, so it's like a trigger, right? So when you're thinking of it, you're always having, your body reacts. Your body reacts, and if people would just pay attention to how their body reacts when they think of something that they've experienced, you can see how your body reacts. And so for me, when I realized that how my body was reacting. So I started to shift that, and I started to start thinking. I would do like little tricks, like word association. Like if you say something right, you can shift it. And as I was doing that, I noticed that I was able to change the way I felt about things. But it was consistency. I was consistently changing that negative narrative into a positive. And that's ultimately what I ended up doing through my journey while I was incarcerated. When I started to go through that process of change, now it was an everyday thing. And so now that I'm home, I'm able to just practice that, and it just becomes second nature. But that healing was the part of the journey, was that healing, right? Yeah. And I think we were talking about that earlier. What I learned was, how do you know when you truly have healed from something? And it's very challenging for an individual to talk about some trauma or something that triggers them, because how it makes them feel. It's like it pierces you. It's so sensitive to the touch, right? And so for me, that's how I knew that I had done the work and healed from a lot of that trauma, because now I'm able to talk about it, and I don't have no negative emotions towards it. If anything, it's more in a way to inspire change and growth, right? And so that's basically it's just shifting it.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a key thing. Again, reframing is going to take you to the next level a lot of the times, because I've been in dark places in terms of I mentioned psychedelic experiences, right?
Right.
And I think when you put yourself in those positions, right, you are taking the choice to take this substance, right, but what you go through is kind of forced on you, right?
Yeah. And
in your case, you went through the darkness, but you decided that this was something that you were gonna take upon yourself,
right,
and make those changes.
100%.
And in the complete sober state, where you have no other option but to just look inward. And a lot of the things is a lot of the time in our communities, in our societies nowadays, we don't get the chance to be alone with our thoughts, and if we do, we don't want to know about them, and we run away, we wean ourselves off with like social media or something.
I'm glad you said that, because you just tapped into it. I'm glad you said it, because what I've learned, that involuntarily, right, when I went to prison, that I shifted something, a negative into a positive. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. Exactly what you said. Where we live at today in this state of technology, there's many distractions. Mm-hmm. Everything is a distraction. And distraction from what? People don't want to tap into the root of what's making them feel negatively, whether it's trauma or whatever's going on in their life. So there's so many distractions to not allow you to do that. And so if you really were to put somebody in a space with no sound, just quiet, how would you feel? You know what I mean? And so for me, that's what happened. I didn't have distractions no more. There was no cell phones. There was no TV. There was no media. There was nothing other than just myself and my thoughts. So no distraction. And in that process is where I learned the self-reflection, self-growth, and self-awareness. And so those were the steps. And that awareness is what allows me to make those choices in my life, whether it's positive or negative, right? But to get there, I needed to have no distractions.
Right.
And so I used that in a positive way. And I'm grateful for that, because now when I find myself wherever I'm at and I'm like saying like, oh, wow, I've got a lot of things going on. And you start to feel that little sense of overwhelming. I step back and I said, I don't want to be right here. Why am I taking this on? Why am I doing this? Why am I taking this call? I'm responsible for my energy. I'm responsible for what I allow in. And when I realized that, I'd say, you know what? I don't want to be in this conversation, or I don't want to be around this, because it's the way it makes me feel. So it's being responsible for your energy, you know? And key to it is that, what you said.
I mean, on top of that too, like I can only imagine like the vulnerability that you had to go in through for yourself. You know, I can't compare with any of the experiences that you've personally have gone through, but one thing I can talk about is in regards to the overwhelming emotions that you can get when you're in these positions where you're just like so deep in your head, but you still know that if you allow yourself to feel, you allow yourself to cry, to feel the anger, to feel the sadness, or you're only continuing to allow yourself to be human, and you're still continuing to make that connection even when you're putting yourself in those positions, you know?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you said that, because we as a society, we look at vulnerability as a weakness. What I learned from myself, that is my strength, because in that vulnerability comes change and growth. And that was like revealing to me, because I realized that one of the biggest ones, obviously in my journey and everything, but especially in my relationship with my wife, allowing myself to be vulnerable, as scary as it was, you know, because before we got together, full disclosure, I was still incarcerated. And I remember sharing with her one day when she came to visit me, and before we decided to even entertain a relationship, I remember sitting in that room, visiting room, and I said, I want to share with you myself, all the bad, all the good, everything, because I want you to have that freedom of choice to decide, hey, I want to be with him, I don't, right? And so I had to be vulnerable. I had to be vulnerable to share my everything, and which I did. And it was very surprising, because I thought that she was going to tell me like she didn't want to be with me, or she was going to look at me different. And you know what she says to me? She says, I don't see you any different. If anything, I love you more. Damn. And I was like, whoa, this is crazy. Like the fact of allowing myself to be vulnerable, was not what I thought it was going to be. And it was in that vulnerability. And I learned through my journey, like when I was incarcerated, doing programs, and even, what I do now in the fire service, is sometimes you just have to have that courage to be the first one to show your scars. And when you do, man, other people are join in because they're willing to just be a part of that journey, because you had the courage to be able to say, yeah, I've experienced this. I've done this, and they're like, wow, let me share with this, and that's the vulnerability that, and in that comes change.
And the bonds that you create through this common suffering, we see these things that we all kind of relate to, right? It's like class struggle or just any sort of struggle. Like if we understand where this is coming from, it only binds you closer, and that is where you find complete strength among your peers.
For sure. And that's where I've learned, like, my journey, like what I do now, like mentorship, and even in the fire service when I work, I'm the older guy. So I accept that. I know that. I'm not the younger guy. But what I've learned is that sometimes younger individuals don't have that courage, to allow themselves to be vulnerable because they're still, growing and maturing. And so sometimes just you sharing your vulnerabilities, your mistakes that you've made, opens up that dialogue, right? And it's life-changing because I till this day, the conversation I had with good buddies of mine that I've had is even coming home, like I've had conversation with them, they're like, wow, I did not know that. And that bond, like you said, all of a sudden they share something about themselves and I'm like, whoa, man, thank you for sharing that, and you have that connection because you have this trust, this confidentiality, right? You're able to have that conversation and it's not with judgment, And so I think that that's very important, is having these conversations about trauma, about addiction, what we go through, And so, yeah, no, for sure. I think it's a positive thing in my eyes.
Yeah. And now what's your perspective on how the public views incarcerated individuals? I mean, of course, when you think about that, people say, oh, well, they're criminals. They did the crime. They got to pay the time, the arguments that they have. But in reality, at least to me, it seems like there's a lot of, again, mental work that people in these positions often go through because they have the time to, really delve into this part of themselves. But what can you tell the public about this here?
So for me, I can empathize a lot with that because prior to me being locked up, I had never been incarcerated. So I knew what it was like to prejudge individuals, right, and see it a certain way. But then all of a sudden, I'm on the opposite side. So now I'm incarcerated, and my loved ones, I wasn't the only one doing time. They were doing time with me, and they were also probably looked upon a certain way. But what I will say is this, in regards to that preconception of how people view incarcerated individuals, some of the most caring, empathetic individuals are people that are locked up. And you know why? It's because we've done the work and we've been to the bottom. Yeah. We've experienced some of the stuff that most people in life have not experienced, right? So there's so much hope and there's so much change there, right? But people don't see it because you have to get past that view of how you see the world. And so I like to say this, that it starts with this one word, love. When an individual is able to love themselves, the way they see the rest of the world is from that perspective lens. But when people are still hurting internally, it's harder for them to share that with others. And so that's where a lot of that judgment comes, because that's where the disconnection comes from. I truly believe that judgment causes disconnection, and community and spirituality in that community is connection. That's really what it's about. And so my hope is through conversations that we're having now, like me being here and other individuals that are starting to come out and talk about this, that have experienced this transition of change, right? Now the public's going to be like, wow, I didn't know that individuals had the capacity while they were incarcerated were able to do certain things, right? And now there's more discussion, because from so many friends of mine that I work with and see, they're on that journey. And it's powerful. And it's now, I'm glad that the public is starting to see it and we're having this conversation. But it's going to start, true change is going to start as being a living example. And bottom line, it boils down to consistency, like people seeing that consistency in individuals, right? Because that's what they're going to trust. And as they see that pattern, then they're going to be like, oh, maybe we did get it wrong. Maybe we shouldn't have, continuously just incarcerated individuals. I'm paraphrasing here, but it's the Russian author Dostoevsky. He says, you can tell a lot about a community by the way they treat their prisoners. So for me, it's like well, how do we treat our prisoners? You know? And as you can see in California, there hasn't been hasn't been good. And I do believe that there's been a lot of positive change and discussion now. But now it goes even in depth, like, how do you treat your prisoners? Well, now how do you treat your incarcerated firefighters that are now looked upon as heroes?
Yeah.
These guys are incarcerated. They're saving community, they're saving property, and they're saving lives, right? And I like to say it this way, like, a lot of individuals that are incarcerated firefighters, they're not lifers. They're going to come home. They have probably 3 years left to come home to the society, right? And so they shouldn't have a death sentence because you risk your life when you're going out there fighting these fires, right?
Yeah.
So that you could die from doing that, and you could get injured. But majority of them, including myself, we do it because, one, it's something positive, and then one step closer to coming home. And then it's the work you get to do is just life-changing. It's hard work. It's, you just have a sense of accomplishment. But I think the public are starting to see that, and now the conversation is starting to be had about, like, wow, we didn't know these guys had the capacity, and females too, had the capacity to do this type of work and change, So yeah.
How would you describe the feeling or the emotions that one goes through when they're put into these positions where, again, behind bars, and you're consistently seeing parts that might be degrading to your humanity, but when you come out and you're of service, you start seeing, like, the complete opposite. You start seeing that your work is being validated. Like, how does that feed the soul?
So initially, like, for me, that it was challenging for the first part, because obviously going to prison, committing a crime, you're in a selfish mindset because obviously you're only thinking of yourself, making those negative choices, right? So when you're going into the system, that mindset is just continuous, right? Something has to give and change. And so as time goes on, if you mature, right, certain things, I like to say it's unfortunate. It's usually something traumatic or something near-death experience in a person's life, and they have like a aha moment, right? Yeah. And then in those moments, that's when they're like, oh man, I start to see things differently, right? They start to see life differently. They start to value things differently. And so for me, being in those environments, like seeing that, it was eye-opening. And as far as like how the public, I didn't even think about it at the time, because it was not even a thought in my head of how people perceived me. It was more so how I perceived myself, and in that time, I didn't see myself as good because of my environment. That's what we're being fed, is like you're nobody, you're this is what you are, and the system is designed to oppress you, right? But the craziest thing about it is, like, out of that can come beautiful and great things through that experience if you allow yourself to, and that's what I've seen, and that's what we continuously see now. So it's shifted, and now where we're at in the fire service, like, we're starting to see the good in it. We're starting to see the positive change. We're starting to see, like, the humanity, like you were saying. For me, that's really what it boiled down to, is like being able to come back to that, and it's awesome. I mean, it's awesome to be able to, be a part of that journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. You spend so much time not feeling any love, that when you're put in the position where, like, now you're just getting like a huge, standing ovation from the people in Los Angeles and California. Like, oh my God, like, they're really putting in the work. I can only imagine how the sense of, like, fulfillment, what that feels like.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because, like, for me, that was the challenge mentally that I had to go through when I was at the firehouse, and, running calls and going to incidents and servicing the community, actually going in there and performing medical calls, running medical calls. And I think it was very important to the transition, to be able to reconnect to society and see things from that light, because once I did come home, like, I didn't look at myself as a hero, right? But once I started doing the work now as a firefighter now, I remember going to a parade. We were in a parade in our engine, and we're driving, and the community's waving at us, and we park the engine and get out of the engine and give stickers, and the kids are just coming, and they're just looking at you with this like, oh wow, firefighter. And in my head I'm like, wow, this is crazy, because I know in the back of my head what I had gone through, and now where I'm at, like you said, the hero perspective, right? And for me, I've never felt like that. I've always looked at it like a hero is more so somebody that just shows up in a time of need. And I think that everybody has the capacity to do that, and I get it. Because like most people are in the most vulnerable state of their life, they want help, But for me, I look at it like it's something I still haven't really, accepted. It's more so I'm passionate about helping others. That's my life's purpose, is to be of service, and however that looks like, whether it's in the fire service or whether it's just like, mentoring, or even just listening, just sitting down and listening. Like before I came in here into the studio, I was just outside, and a dude was walking across, and he was like, "Hey, do you have $1 for some pizza?" And in my head, I'm like, absolutely, but who are you? I want you to be seen, And the other guy I was talking in the shop was like tripping out that, I'm having this conversation that somebody that just keeps on walking by and nobody gives them like the time of day. But the funny thing about it is, the way I saw it was, I know what that feels like not to be seen. And I don't want anybody to feel that. Yeah. So for me, is to give those people that value, of being seen. So yeah.
And that's priceless there, like, I think that's what a lot of us crave, just to feel acknowledged, just to feel like what we're doing has some sort of value to our communities or to our people around us, But again, it's like sometimes you got to put yourself in a position where you're self-reflecting, and that these other people around you, they really are just you in a different experience.
100%. And yeah, these stories we share and everything, it's not about to think that anybody's better than another person or anything. It's not. Honestly, what it really is just to have that connection to humanity and being able to allow others to feel that value for themselves, love themselves, right? And to be seen. So everybody has that journey within themselves. Like there's nobody that's better than each other. We're all the same. Yeah. You know what I mean? We're all the same. But I like to say that we all have the capacity to love, but it all starts with the nurturing. It's like if you're not nurtured in that, then it's hard to have that for yourself, and therefore, most importantly, share it with others, So for me, because of what I've been through, my life experience, my ups and downs, and like, to me, that's where like, I think it's very important, is being able to be there, because, I have this saying that I say that we are not the sum of what we believe we are. We are the sum of how we treat others. What we think we are, what we've accomplished, right? What we have, money, it's irrelevant, because when we leave this earth, none of that matters. Yeah. Right. People don't remember you for that. They don't, he was a great this, or he believed in this. They don't care. All they remember is how you treated them. If it was in a negative way, there's going to be a negative emotion, and they're going to remember that. If it was in a positive way, they're going to be like, oh man, that guy made me feel good. Like, they didn't even know, who you are or anything. Yeah. All they just know is like, man, and that's what you're going to be. That's the sum of you when you leave this earth. So I believe if we focus on that, then we can change the world in a positive way. We can create so much positive change, and that's important to me.
Yeah, I love how you put that, because, when you think about it, like your perspective of who you think you are at the time when you leave this world that version of yourself leaves with you too, and like you said, it completely is going to be up to the way that you were with other people, and that's what's going to be the essence of who you were.
For sure. I remember we were talking about it and about redemption, the what redemption is and what it looks like, and for me, redemption is it's an ongoing thing and it never stops, because it's making those positive changes, right, in your life continuously. And it's not thinking of that sense of self anymore in the way like, you know what, it's about me. It's being able to surpass that and say, you know what, it's about others. Because when you start doing that, I'm telling you, bro, your world will change. Mm-hmm. But it starts first on a micro level, meaning in your immediate environment at home. That's the most important thing. Like you can't be of service in helping out other people, but at home, that's not a good place, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, that is my balance. Me and my wife have about these conversations a lot. It's like, I need to be good. We need to be good. Family needs to be good, because I can't do anything outside if this is not good.
Right.
Because the most important thing to me is this. Mm-hmm. Because if this is good, then everything else is just going to go, go, go. And that's it, bro. Because believe it or not, like when you're in your deepest, darkest moments, who are the ones you rely on the most?
Yeah.
And so I think it's a beautiful thing when you can be in a place where you can be of service now, and that your loved ones and your family is okay with it, because mm-hmm. they've seen what you've gone through and they believe in your journey, and they know what that looks like, and you can help out other people's,
Now, how will you approach somebody who was in, or who is in the position that you were in? Because again, you mentioned early on in the conversation that the change comes from within, right? Like you can have these rehabilitation programs and all this stuff, but at the end of the day, it ends up on you, So how do you approach this conversation to somebody who's barely in that mindset?
So what I do on a personal level, I do it with cadets, members, people that are trying to be in the fire service. But even if it's not just that, just somebody that was previously incarcerated or anything, is I give them my number. Why? Or I take the time to talk to them. Why? Because I've learned that in those conversations comes that trust, because you're able to have those deep conversations. But obviously your vulnerability is if you're showing who you are. It's pure, and in that, people connect with that. And so going back to what you're saying is, what I've learned is you can't change a person. People are not going to change because you want them to change.
Right.
You can hope as much as you want, but it has to come from within, and they have to experience that themselves. You can give people books and say, hey, read this book or listen to this, and it's not going to matter, right? It has to be internal. But it starts with each individual, like ourselves, being that living change.
Yeah.
Because what they see, right, that's what they believe. It's our actions that validates our words. The words, like what we're talking about, means nothing if my actions aren't in alignment with it. You know what I mean? So I think with people that you're talking about is like, it's just being there, showing up, and then listening when they want to talk and share whatever it is they need to share, or just know that they got somebody that can just hear them, be there for them. I think this is most important, because in that you may be able to affect change without you even knowing it. Because I've learned that one of the biggest things I learned is like, I hear it all the time of people like, oh, it's so easy to talk to you. I can share stuff with you. Mm-hmm. And I'm just listening. And they start talking about certain stuff, their trauma, their experience, right? And the next thing you know, they start letting out all this stuff that they've been holding in.
Yeah.
And then when they're done, they're like, man, I feel so much weight, like a weight was lifted off me, And I'm like thinking to myself, like, no, you did that. You did that. In my head, I'm like, I didn't do it. You did it. I was just listening. And I think that that's the important thing. So for me, like what you're asking, it's just being there. Being of service is just being able to be there, however that looks. If it's sometimes just answering that phone when somebody may need to be sharing something, and with no judgment, that's the key. it can be with judgment, because when you have judgment, there's separation. If you start talking to somebody and say, hey, well, I see the world like this, or I believe in this, and people are going to be closed off right away. So if you can be just open, right? That's it.
No, that's a great point. I mean, that takes effort on both ends. As a listener, right? If you want to practice listening, you have to let go of that ego. That ego is a big one, especially when somebody's trying to vent to you or really express themselves on how they feel. If you start making it about how you feel or how this affects you, then you lost the whole point of this whole conversation. I think we have to give people the opportunity to have these conversations, to use these kind of platforms to just give perspective and light to the experiences that we may not know of. And that's only not only going to give us a well-rounded view of what the world is and what the human capabilities are in terms of how we can handle things.
Right.
But at the same time, we're giving ourselves the opportunity to let go of that ego and then fully embrace people without judgment and really allow for that pure love, because it sounds cheesy, but that love is going to be integral to everything that we do.
100%, bro. 100%. That's it. That's the root of it. And the more you have that in you, the more you're inclined to share it with others, Yeah. So it starts with that self. You can't expect to have it from others. The expectation to have love from other people, it's yourself. Yeah. You have to love self first. And it's two parts. It's action. How do you demonstrate in action that you love yourself? And then the second part is how you feel about yourself, your esteem. And that's the root of it. That's how come I changed all that. My esteem now is not what it was when I was younger.
Yeah.
And so loving self is very important. So therefore, when you do, you're able to love others, And
now, one last question before we wrap this up. Right? In terms of this is for the audience, for the public. It's from your perspective, what can we do as a whole, as a community, to help reinforce these conversations and shine a light on these individuals who are seeking to better themselves?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. If changes is something that people are wanting, you have to be proactive in that change. So, meaning your community. We have the capacity to change our community by going and voting, changing laws. So be proactive in that. Secondly, if you really want to know about it, then have the courage to go into these prison systems, right? Yeah. Go into a prison and be part of, sit down in one of these programs. It's life-changing, And there's many nonprofit organizations that can assist with that. I'm part of an anti-recidivism coalition, and they do that. They go in there into the prison system and give hope, So I would encourage, the public to just be proactive in that change. Don't think of it like, oh man, bad, negative. No,
right.
Be proactive. You know what I mean? Don't be reactive. Don't wait till something bad happens. Be proactive. And so change laws. If you see something that's negative, you have the power. The people have the power. And how they do it? By voting for these laws in your community, right? Yeah. And so that's on that level, you can do that microly where you at. So show up in the polls when those laws come up, educate yourself. And then secondly, go to the prisons and just get to meet somebody, have the courage. And you'll be surprised. I guarantee you're going to be amazed at what you see, It can be life-changing for you,
Damn, Eddie. Thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. I'm honestly going to continue moving for my days to come. I'm going to try to do my best to move with purpose and keep in mind your words from that other episode. I'm telling you about making choices every day, to be better. And I think, again, once you take it day by day, even if we're not behind bars, we have the capability of pushing this part of ourselves every day to make sure that we become better.
That's it. One choice at a time, one day at a time, bro. That's all it is. Yeah.
Thank you, Eddie. If people want to, get in contact with you, maybe, find out more about you, is there any specific spot?
Where so you can find me on Instagram, Eduardo Herrera Jr. 22. And as you know, my podcast that I was on, Safe Space Combos, that talks a lot about my journey. And I'm part of ARC. I'm also an alumni for Ventura Training Center, so I give time over there. So yeah, so they can find me through that. And yeah, I just want to thank you for, this opportunity to sharing, and shout out to my family, because they're part of this journey, and everybody that's been a part of it. I love you guys, and I'm grateful to you guys.
Eddie, thank you so much again, for honestly, from the bottom of my heart. And, thank you for the service. Thank you for just being a wonderful, example of the journey of changing. It is possible for anybody, no matter what we're doing. It's going to take time. It's going to take courage, and it's going to take love. So
that's it, love. And shout out to my wife, Daisy, because without her, I couldn't do any of this.
Hey, shout out Daisy.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Everybody else, you're listening to KQBH LP, Los Angeles, California, 101.5 FM. You just finished listening to the Social Primate. And with that, we'll leave you with some music from the Altons with their song, When You Go.